Hey guys, glad to be here. You have no idea what kind of adventure it's been. First, of course, we had to postpone the actual full seminar. By the way, thank you for sticking with us. And you won't lose anything. In fact, you will gain more stuff because of the adventure, because you're going to have a lot more material covered. Because what I'm covering today, I was supposed to cover it in the live seminar. And what Tom and Naomi are going to be covering was also part of the original full seminar. So once it's being held, then we will actually add new material to compensate for what has already been taught. So for example, instead of because you will already see the deadlift, squat, bench press technique optimization practical side. So we won't do that in the next seminar. Instead, we'll do the best assistance exercises to fix weaknesses or sticking point or problems in the main lift. Because in my opinion, that is one of the most important thing to master as a coach, because the most important thing is to be able to solve problems, fix issues, correct problems when they arise. So basically you can either use several special methods, techniques, like a specialization phase, like several training tools, like weight releasers, stuff like that, to strengthen key part of a movement. Or you can use targeted exercises to fix specific weaknesses. So you'll actually end up winning because you're going to have like 20% more material than was originally planned. Now, here comes the adventure part. Now, of course, the fact that I had to postpone everything and cancel the flights, the hotel, that's already like pretty annoying. But this is actually the third time I filmed this seminar. I filmed it 2 days ago, and because of my own mistakes, I forgot to press the live button. So after an hour of speaking, giving a great performance, we actually figured that, you know what, it's actually not live and not recording. So I was like super depressed. So we decided to film it again yesterday, so 1 day later. And for some technical reason, we did not have the playback from Webinar Jam. So we have to film it again today for the third time. So hopefully it's going to be decent this time too. Anyway, that's how much I love you guys, because normally if I lose something that I've done, I will not reproduce it. I've written like 6,000 words articles that I just didn't bother rewriting because I forgot to save them. So consider yourself lucky. With that being said, let's get on with today's presentation. Now, what I want to cover, and let me make myself a bit bigger here. All right. What I want to cover today is the Eternal Warrior training approach, which is something that I've been working on recently for my own personal interest, as well as the fact that as coaches, the population it targets is more and more and more a key demographic in our client base, specifically the adult who's probably been training for a while. So not a beginner by any means, lots of training experience, but they're getting older, like they're like in their 40s, late 40s, 50s, and even 60s, or maybe even later. And when that happens, you have some changes, both physiologically as well as to your schedule, available time to train, responsibility, stress level, that might require a shift in training focus. It might not be the best time to try to become as huge as possible. Instead, focus on improving your health, improving your function, and probably slowing down the aging process while still looking jacked in the process. That's what we're trying to accomplish with this system. Now, so the goal is to increase longevity and quality of life through an increase in functionality and physiological adaptation. That's super important, because what we want is not just to extend life. What we want is actually stay as functional as we were when we were younger, as you're getting older, or maybe even improve those functions. Functions being the nervous system's function, cardiovascular function, muscular function, mobility, all basically being able to utilize your body to be able to do anything. You don't want anything that will limit your capacity to enjoy life. And in the process, we want to trigger physiological responses that might slow down the aging process on top of that. What we will do that by still trying to focus on looking good naked, because, well, it's still a huge part of why people train. They want to look better, especially those who might not be like super passionate about training like we are. Like personally, even if I didn't like look jack or anything, I would still train because I love training. I love all the training methods. I like experimenting. I like the feeling in the muscle when I'm producing lots of force. But not everybody is like that. Most people are focused on achieving a certain goal, and most of the time that goal involves at least a pretty significant part of looking better. So either getting leaner or getting more muscle, more likely a combination of both. So that's what we're trying to accomplish with this system. You need to understand one thing, okay? There's no such thing as a perfect program for everybody and every situation, okay? Now, the Eternal Warrior is not the best approach if you want to maximize your muscle growth. You'll still gain muscle, but it's not a program to use if your goal is to have that bodybuilder physique or just gain as much muscle as possible. It's not a program that will turn you into a world-class powerlifter or that will give you the best strength gains you can have. You will still have strength gains, but it won't be the maximum you could if you were specifically training for that purpose. It will not make you it's not the best program for a strength speed athlete. There are many components that will actually transfer pretty well to athletic performance. So you will get better conditioning, you'll get faster, you get more explosive, you get stronger. But if I were to train an athlete specifically for a strength and speed sport, I would use a different approach. An approach that you will see in the live seminar, the OCTS training system, focusing on force absorption, conversion toward a more fast twitch fiber profile, and so on and so forth, right? And transfer, of course, to sporting abilities. So what I'm getting at is that this specific training approach is designed for the client who wants a little bit of everything without having to spend 20 hours per week in the gym, or also want to put a premium on health, but not to the point of completely sacrificing the aesthetic and performance side of things, okay? Which is actually a pretty darn large portion of our demographic or potential clients, because most of the clients we work with, well, they want be a bit leaner, they want a bit more muscular, they want to be a bit stronger, a bit healthier, feel better. They don't want to maximize everything. They don't come into the gym. They're sedentary clients. You know what? I'm 42. I think I want to become a professional football player. That won't happen, okay? So for the average Joe, the Gen Pop clientele we're working with, this will actually be a system that will be very useful. On top of that, because of the clients we get when we do personal coaching, well, normally they are people of a slightly older age because they have the financial means to afford your services, meaning that they will normally be at least like professional in their late 30s, probably early 40s, or even in their 50s. So that's a pretty good system for these people, okay? Now, what you need to know. First, okay, maximizing hypertrophy and maximizing longevity and health are not necessarily like a good match, okay? I'm not saying that building muscle is detrimental to your health or longevity. However, doing everything possible to maximize the amount of muscle you're building can actually hurt you in several regards when it comes to health and longevity. Now, while you are young, that's fine, because there's no wear and tear. Your cardiovascular system is fine. Your lifestyle probably allows it. But as you're getting older and older and older, you'll find that carrying those like 60 or well, it's in kilos, let's say that 25, 30, 35 kilos of muscle more than a normal adult might actually be a burden to your body that might decrease lifespan, okay? I know that's kind of a bad thing to say to people who love training. Many of you probably love getting huge. I love getting huge. I love being muscular. I'm not saying we're not going to target that, but there will be a caveat. You need to understand the truth, even if the truth hurt, right? So what do I mean when I say that maximizing hypertrophy can be detrimental to longevity and health? Is that the more mass the body carries, whether it's fat, whether it's muscle, or even water, the more mass relative to your size, your height, the more demand you put on your cardiovascular system. In fact, when you look at muscles, they have 10 times as much capillarization as fatty tissues. It requires 10 times more blood being sent there. So the heart has to work a lot harder to feed and send stuff or clear stuff out of the muscles. So if anything, carrying more weight in a form of muscle is more of a challenge on the cardiovascular system than fat. I'm not saying that being fat is healthy, because it has several risk factors involved also. But more importantly is, when it comes to obesity, what leads to the problems or the potential problems is more what you did to gain that amount of fat in your oral life. Overeating, eating tons of saturated fat. So once a person is significantly obese or overweight, the stuff they did, being inactive, eating tons and tons of food, oftentimes the wrong type of food, that actually led to an accumulation of plaque in your arteries. It led to higher blood pressure and all that kind of stuff that actually present risk factors. Now, the obesity itself, just the fact that you're carrying more weight, is a risk factor in itself. But it actually doesn't matter whether that weight comes from muscle or fat when it comes to that specific risk factor, okay? Now, of course, if you have a lot of muscle mass, you probably have several risk factors that you don't have. You probably, it's because you've been active a lot, so you probably have a better cardiovascular system. You probably have lower blood pressure than someone of the same body weight but with a higher body fat, better insulin sensitivity, so less likelihood of having diabetes and high blood sugar. So it's a good thing to train, don't get me wrong. But I mean, how many guys who are like 120 kilos of pure muscle do you know who are 60 or 70 years old? You don't see them walking around, okay? Now, what happens is, well, of course, the heart works harder to sustain that muscle mass, right? And by working harder, you put a lot more stress on the cardiovascular system. Now, you probably are aware of where the body mass index, okay? The body mass index, which is the ratio of your mass relative to your height. Now, the BMI is a shitty way of evaluating body composition. I don't need to tell you that. You know that. But it's not a useless measure, okay? The BMI was never designed to be a measure of body composition or how fit you are. That's not the purpose. The reason why it was actually invented by insurance companies. Insurance companies that needed a very easy way to assess the potential longevity of a client. Because insurance companies, it's basically a bet, right? They are betting that you will live so long that you will actually fork more money, send more money their way than what they will have to pay out once you die. That is the bet. Also, insurance companies will take the money that you give them and will invest them on the stock market and so to make it bigger, right? More money. So it's a bet they're making on you. So they want to evaluate how long will you potentially live. So they know, okay, if he gives me 50 pounds or $50 a month and he lives 30 more years, here's the amount of money I can make from this guy. So, and if the premium is like $100,000, how much do I need to charge considering his potential lifestyle not to lose money? That's all it was. The BMI was a way to quickly assess if someone is more likely to live longer or not. And it's a matter of fact that a higher BMI, whether it's muscle or fat, is actually not conducive to living a longer life. There are, of course, exceptions, okay? But that's why the measure was created. It was never meant as a body composition measure, even though it's being used for that purpose by many quote unquote experts. Just thought you'd like to know that, okay? Now, so we know that the extra amount of muscle, okay, or mass does increase the workload on the cardiovascular system, okay? We know that. So it's either a matter of I want to decrease my amount of mass, or I want to make my cardiovascular system as strong and functional as possible to better be able to support the amount of muscle I have, which is the angle I'm going for. Instead of telling you, you know what, you need to drop that muscle, okay? You need to lower your muscle if you are to live longer. No, I'm going to tell you, we're going to do everything possible to make your cardiovascular system more functional so that it can support the amount of muscle you have without being stressed. In fact, it is one of my beliefs that having a weak or inefficient cardiovascular system is one of the limiting factors in how much muscle you can carry. Think about it for a while. Your body will not do anything that will voluntarily harm itself or decreases its chance of survival, right? So if it knows that adding 5 kilos more of muscle will be too much for your support system, chances are that it will trigger mechanisms to prevent you from adding that muscle tissue. Now, if you have a strong cardiovascular system, then you are probably allowing yourself to add more muscle, right? Now, bodybuilders will bypass that protective mechanism by taking anabolics, which will add muscle regardless of whether it's safe or not compared to your cardiovascular function. That might be one of the reasons why steroid-using bodybuilders have a pretty high incidence of heart disease, right? Of course, you have the fact that steroids by themselves will increase blood pressure, mostly via sodium. Well, the two mechanisms that will increase blood pressure with the use of anabolics are sodium retention and water retention, of course, which will always increase blood pressure. And also the fact that several anabolics, especially those with a high androgenic ratio, will increase the sensitivity of the beta-adrenergic receptors. Basically, steroids make you more responsive to adrenaline. That's where, quote unquote, roid rage comes from. By making you super sensitive to adrenaline, you're more prone to aggressive, impatient, competitive behavior, because that's what adrenaline does. It puts you in that fight or flight mode, okay? And one of the side effects of increased adrenaline activity is an increase in blood pressure. So steroids will increase blood pressure by these two mechanisms, and that also increases the stress on your heart. On top of that, steroids will favor a bad lipid profile. Specifically, it will increase the bad cholesterol and decrease the good cholesterol. The bad cholesterol deposits fatty molecules inside of your blood vessel arteries, creating plaque, reducing the space you have available in your bloodstream to send blood to it, making your heart work a lot harder to push that blood to that smaller opening. Good cholesterol will take the fatty acids out. So it's very important to have a positive ratio, and steroids, especially oral steroids, completely mess that up. Orals and the DHT-based steroids will mess up your lipid profile. You're super fast. And finally, there's also the mechanism by which steroids will actually make your heart thicker. Okay, it will make the walls of the heart thicker, which means the heart cannot expand as much. That does two things. First, the more your heart can expand, the more blood you can bring into the heart and push out with every beat. When you do that, you don't need to have the heart contract or beat as often, meaning less work for the heart. The second impact is that when I can stretch the heart, I'm actually relying on a stretch reflex to push the blood out instead of using voluntary muscle contraction. The more you can stretch the heart, the more stretch reflex, the less muscle contraction you need. So basically, when you have that rock hard heart that is common with steroid user, you have a quicker heart rate, and also you have to use more voluntary contraction to push your blood out, both of which are severely stressful for your heart, because it needs to work a lot harder instead of just utilizing the mechanical tissue or the mechanical properties of the tissue to push the blood out. Anyway, topic closed. Just to explain what steroids can do for your heart. I think it's interesting personally. Now, other things that you do to maximize muscle growth that can hurt the anti-aging process or speed up the aging process is what I call bulking or eating a significant surplus in hope of building more muscle tissue. Now, bulking, you need to understand why it works. Okay, a lot of people simply believe that if I'm eating more calories, more nutrients, then I have more building block to build a muscle. That's not exactly how it works. Although certainly being able to have probably a bit more protein because you have more food overall can probably help a bit. But in reality, the reasons why bulking, quote unquote, works, and why it works better when the calories come mostly from carbohydrates instead of fat, are the hormonal and enzymatic responses to that high influx of carbohydrates. Specifically, the large amount of calories and carbs will increase mTOR, which is an enzyme that speeds up cellular development, including muscle repair and protein synthesis. So it helps build muscle. It will also increase IGF-1, which is highly anabolic, probably the most anabolic hormone in your body. So basically, the reason why you will produce IGF-1 is when you combine in your day, not necessarily at the same time, insulin and growth hormone, the liver will release IGF-1. Now, growth hormone will be released when you sleep or when you're training, for example, and insulin, of course, you will maximize it when you're eating carbs. So basically, when I'm giving a large influx of carbs to my body, especially around the workouts, I will maximize IGF-1 and insulin, both of which are anabolic and anti-catabolic. So all of these three hormones and enzymes, which will be elevated when you are quote unquote bulking, will put your body in a more anabolic state. Basically, it allows you to better use the protein you're ingesting and turn it into muscle. On top of that, the best supplement to decrease cortisol levels are carbs. Carbs will decrease cortisol because two of the functions of cortisols are mobilizing stored energy when you are in a deficit and also elevating blood sugar level when it's too low. So when your blood sugar is fairly high because you're consuming lots of carbs, well, you remove one of the reasons to release cortisol. When you are in a caloric surplus, you remove another reason to release cortisol. So by keeping cortisol lower and the anabolic hormones higher, then you are more likely to build more muscle tissue at an optimal rate. You cannot, and that's very important, you cannot exceed your own natural rate of muscle building. However, the bulking ensures that you will be at the top of what you can achieve at that stage of your career. And that's important to understand because depending on how much muscle you already have built, depending on your experience level in the weight room, well, the amount of muscle you can build will decrease as you gain experience. A normal non-steroid using natural average person, men, of course, women will be about 60% of that number, can build roughly 15 to 20 kilos of muscle above what their normal adult weight would have been throughout their training career. Of course, that's true for like 71% of the population. You're going to have outliers on both sides, but normally that's pretty much what the body can accomplish. So if you already have gained like 16 kilos of muscle, you probably have like 2, 3, maybe 4 kilos of growth left. the rate of adding that tissue will be a lot slower. It will be a matter of maybe half a kilo per year of quality muscle tissue. Whereas if you are a beginner, you have like built 2 kilos of muscle, you still have a lot of growing to do. Your rate can be a lot higher. It can be as high as 2% of your body weight per month in muscle. So an average person can probably gain 2-3 pounds of muscle per month when they are beginners. Why am I telling you that? Because when you are getting older, okay, and you've been training for a long time, bulking makes 0 sense, because all it will do is make you gain more fat and negatively affect your health markers. Because if let's say that your maximum rate of muscle growth at that stage of your life and experience level and how much muscle you've built is, let's say, 1/4 of a kilo per month. So even if you're bulking until your eyes bulge out and the scale goes up by 8 kilos per month, you're still only adding that 1/4 kilo per month, okay? Because the bulking will just maximize or what you can normally reach or naturally reach, okay? So if you bulk, you will gain like 1/4 of a kilo. If you don't bulk, maybe you're gonna gain, let's say, 0.2. So just maybe like 2 or 3% less. So it won't make a big difference, okay? And all of that, adding fat, that will also, of course, increase the stress on your heart. Eating a surplus, which will, as we will see, releases hormones that speed up aging, because that's the thing. mTOR, IGF-1, insulin, it's all fine and good if your goal is to get as huge as possible, but they are also actually speeding up the aging process. So if you always maximize them, you are actually speeding up cellular turnover that makes you age faster, okay? So that's what I'm saying, that when you're trying to do everything possible to maximize muscle growth, you can actually have a negative impact on your health and longevity, okay? Now, as I mentioned earlier briefly, the more effective your cardiovascular system is, the more muscle mass you can carry without overstressing your body. That's why in the Eternal Warrior system, there's a big emphasis on conditioning, not just like cardio, but moving a lot and working all the energy systems, challenging your heart, keeping your heart rate elevated throughout the workout to get the maximum benefit. What you want basically is having the nervous system, the muscular system, and the cardiovascular system be brought up at the same time, staying balanced, okay? That will probably give you the best possible situation to feel good and function your best and live longer, okay? Now, we talked about maximizing muscle, and the strategy we're using are not conducive to longevity. But on the other end of the spectrum, the technique or the methods that are recommended most of the time to slow down aging are normally not conducive to building an impressive physique. We're talking about doing tons of cardio, caloric restriction, low carbs dieting. So it's very hard to build the muscle or the physique you want training that way. That's why the Eternal Warrior was designed, so that you can have a bit like the best of both worlds, or close to the best of both worlds. Now, important point, as you're getting older, the functioning of all the systems will go down. For example, strength will normally decrease by 10 to 15% per decade of life after the age of 35. Power decreases even faster, 17-23%. Mobility will be down by 20% when you reach 50, and goes down by about 1% per year from that point on. Obviously, if you don't train them, okay? So that's why it's important to, when you want to keep your body as functional, as healthy as possible as you're getting older, it's not a matter of I want to maintain my muscle, it's I want to maintain my functions. Muscle mass will follow, okay? If it looks right, it flies right. But it's important to focus on those capacities that tend to decrease with aging and maintain them, or even increase them as much as we can. Now, of course, as I mentioned earlier, middle-aged adults or older adults normally have less time available to train. They have full-time job, they have family, they have kids, they have responsibilities, they have a social life, they probably have more stress, especially compared to like a 20-something, right? I remember reading something on Instagram, and if you read it on Instagram, then it's true. It's like a 45-year-old girl was in great shape, like posted, "I hate seeing those 20-something influencers. Yeah, I was when I was 20, I was sexy and muscular without making any effort too, right?" So it's much easier to reach those goals when you are younger. You have more time to train, you have less stress in your life. That makes a huge difference, because a large life stress increases cortisol, will tend to decrease anabolic hormones, put you in a harder situation to be able to build muscle. Now, here are the principles of the Eternal Warrior system. Afterwards, I'm going to cover the various components of a workout, and then we'll go in greater detail about each of these components. First, you want a high density of work. Now, I'm fully aware that taking longer rest intervals will be better to maximize hypertrophy and strength. The reason is that when you take longer between sets, provided that the rest period is not so extensive that you lose the activation potentiation effect, which is probably like at the tops at 4, maybe 5 minutes, longer rest intervals allows you to maintain your performance level for longer. So basically, you have less of a performance drop-off from set to set. So the average load you are using, the average muscle tension you're producing during your sets is higher. And that is especially important if you are utilizing the progressive overload system, gradually trying to be stronger and stronger and stronger. So having longer rest intervals will allow you to get stronger more easily and maintain a higher average weight on all your sets, which could be a potential benefit when it comes to adding size and strength. I don't deny that. In fact, when we do the heavy work, which is 1 exercise per workout in the Eternal Warrior, I do recommend slightly longer rest intervals. But overall, we're still trying to shoot for a higher density of work, more work per unit of time, or shorter rest periods. For example, doing lots of circuits, especially for the assistance work. The reason is that we want to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, if you want to call it that. You're still getting the hypertrophy stimulation or the conditioning stimulation, but you're also working on your heart. I mean, if you do a circuit training, for example, and it lasts 20 minutes and you can maintain your heart rate elevated at around 75-80% of your max heart rate, well, you get the same type of cardiovascular training effect as you would with interval training. When it comes to blood pressure, when it comes to lipid profile, when it comes to the strength of your heart, when it comes to decreasing blood viscosity, which is very important also. So circuit training is a way to combine some hypertrophy stimulation with some cardiovascular benefit. And now, you won't get maximum growth or you won't get maximum conditioning, but you get a decent amount of both. And that's what the Eternal Warrior approach is about. Not maximizing everything, but taking the little time we have to be able to get as much of everything that we can. Okay. Now, you want to focus on overall function. I mean, hypertrophy, losing fat, that's a side effect. That's a side effect. What you're trying to do is keep your body as functional as possible. I was recently reading something by a good friend of mine named Mathieu Bouchard, he's a naturopathic doctor, probably the smartest human being I personally know. Like he's the one person that intimidates me intellectually. And he was writing something that we should stop worrying when it comes to diet. He was talking about diet specifically. We shouldn't worry so much about like losing fat. Instead, we should focus on maintaining the optimal health of all systems, decreasing inflammation, all that stuff. And when you do that, normally, automatically, like it will make it easier to lose the fat. Yeah, you still need to be in a deficit. I'm aware of that. But making your body as healthy and as functional as possible makes everything easier. And I'm going to say the same thing with training. If all your functions are maintained, you keep your body in optimal shape for everything, it makes it easier to achieve all your goals afterwards. Then rule number 3, you want to include conditioning work. Conditioning work for all of your energy system, anaerobic, aerobic. So anaerobic capacity, anaerobic power, aerobic capacity, aerobic power, max VO2, you name it. And what you will see in the Eternal Warrior is that most of these energy systems are being trained with loaded conditioning, either in the form of loaded carries, kettlebell swings, or even like more typical cardiovascular machines, but that provide some form of resistance, like a rowing ergometer, like a air bike, an arm and leg bike. Because what you will see is that the fact that you're providing some resistance will actually decrease the risk of the conditioning interfering with the adaptation to the strength training you did earlier. We'll cover that at the end of this presentation. You need to train hard. That's so important, okay? The main reason that people, as they're getting older, they get weaker, they get more injuries, they lose mass, is because they are afraid of doing so. Basically, someone who's been training hard their whole life, and they get to 45 and so I can't push hard anymore, I'm going to just take it easy, okay? If you've been training at that level of intensity all your life and you move it down here, all you're doing is slowing down the detraining effect, okay? You're just slowing down the detraining effect. And what I noticed is that if you are used to training hard, and all of a sudden I'm going to just push a little bit less because I'm older, what happens is gradually, without even you noticing it, you're actually training less and less and less hard. So what you want is, even as you're getting older, you want to keep training hard. That doesn't mean pushing for 1 RMs. Training hard, what it means is that regardless of the training unit you're doing, is it conditioning, is it mobility, is it strength, is it hypertrophy, whatever it is you do, your goal at every session is to get better. Get better than the preceding session. That means working hard to be able to do a little bit better. Okay, you need to challenge yourself. As you're getting older, the rules of progressive overload don't stop applying. They are still applying. Okay. Now, what happens is, as you're getting older, your capacity to recover will go down. In part because of lifestyle. You have more responsibility, you have more stress, probably sleeping less, yada, yada, yada. We covered that earlier. But also because of some physiological changes. Like some anabolic hormones will be lower. You might have more inflammation. You might have more wear and tear. So it does take longer. So what you need to understand is that you can't sacrifice hard work. Because if, for example, you're used to training 6 days a week, but if I'm training hard 6 days a week, I can't recover, the mistake would be to decrease the intensity. You need to keep training hard, just rest more, have more rest days. With older individuals, I like the one-on, one-off approach. So obviously, it's not always practical with regular clients because, well, it means that they won't have a regular schedule at the gym. 1 week, they will come in Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And other weeks they will come in Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, for example. It will always rotate. So for regular Joe clients on the schedule, it might be better to use Monday, Wednesday, Friday, big sessions, Saturday, easy workout. Like work on isolation stuff, on core, on forearm, on conditioning, on mobility. So 3 hard sessions, one easier one if you want to have those 4 workouts. The reason why you want that off days between hard session is just that, to allow you to train hard. The goal is you want to do everything possible to make sure that every workout you're in the best possible state to give everything you've got. Okay, that's important. Now, include frequent days off. That's what I just mentioned. And you need to move. Okay. The fact that you need more rest to recover should not prevent you from moving more, even on your off days. The more you are using your body in non-stressful activities, walking, like playing sports, doing yard work, cleaning the house, working with your kids, just moving around. The more you can move around, the better off you'll be. For example, when you're talking about walking, okay, walking is overrated when it comes to losing fat, but underrated when it comes to promoting health. At 8,000 steps per day, that's when you start to have significant health boosting benefit. And they top out at around 12,000 steps per day. So when you are in that zone, as often as possible, you will have added benefits when it comes to blood pressure, to lipid profile, and just overall heart function. Now, you also want to get lean, okay? For the reason I mentioned earlier, remember, the more mass you carry, the harder the heart needs to work. So might as well carry most of that mass in the form of muscle. If I'm dropping 10 kilos of fat, it allows me to carry 10 kilos more of muscle without overstressing my heart. Now, getting lean is important. As I mentioned earlier, we want to avoid weight shift as much as possible. So it's not a matter of getting super lean. We want to get to a point of leanness that is sustainable without feeling deprived, gaunt, or losing energy, because that actually releases more cortisol and does all sorts of bad things. So you want to find the leanest you can be while still being functional. So if we look at a workout, what does it look like? I list 4 components here. In reality, we can have up to 5 components if we break off the strength and power portion. For example, in this structure here, we are combining strength and power, either as a complex or just doing one strength movement by itself or just one power movement by itself. What you could do, if you have the time to do it, is to component number 1 would be your mobility work. Component 2 would be your power work, so a jumping or throwing exercise. Then you would move on to component number 3, which would be strength work. Okay. Now, understand this. The reason why someone should do strength and power work for anti-aging purposes is not to lift more weight. It's not to jump higher or sprint faster, although these things are cool. The reason we're doing them is to maintain nervous system function, okay? Unless you're a beginner, like more traditional bodybuilding methods are not that demanding on the nervous system. You won't stimulate that much. It's still better than nothing. So for example, if you have an older person who's sedentary and they start doing like even low intensity weight training, they will have improvement in neuromuscular function and even neurological function. But when we are dealing with someone who has a decent amount of training experience, strength and power work are kind of required to push the limit of what your nervous system can do. And that's the best way to prevent the decline in neurological and neuromuscular function. That's why we're doing the strength and power work, not so much to boost your numbers, okay? And that will actually show when I'm going to talk about the best methods that I like to use for these components. So the component number 1 would be your loaded stretching or mobility work in general. The reason why I mentioned loaded stretching is because it is, in my opinion, the most efficient way to do mobility work. Efficient because it does many things at the same time, not just improve mobility. Loaded stretching is actually a decent tool when it comes to building muscle. It can also reduce the risk of injury because it increases the capacity of your muscles to keep producing force even when they are lengthened, okay? Normally what happens, and that is one of the injury mechanisms that is often seen in sports or even in life in general, is the muscle, the more lengthened it is, the less force it can produce. Normally what happens is the more lengthened the muscle is, the more you are reliant on the stretch reflex to initiate the movement. Now what happens, for example, if you have a sudden stretch of the muscle because you're being hit by someone or carrying stuff that is more heavier than you thought, for example, well, you are rapidly stretching the muscle, and once it reaches that lengthened position, it can't hold because it doesn't have the contraction strength to prevent the stretching, and a tear occur. Now, the loaded stretching, what it does is it stretches a muscle that is producing force. And that trains the nervous system to keep producing force even when the muscle is in its longest state, and over time that will actually help prevent injuries. I'm going to get to loaded stretching a bit more when we talk about this component by itself. Then we have the strength and power work. It can either be just a one strength movement, the lift of the day. It can be just a power exercise. For example, if you like the Olympic lifts, if you're competent in them, it could be that. It can be a complex, which is I really like. A complex is doing one strength and one power exercise as a training unit. So, for example, you could do loaded jump squat, 5 reps with 20% of your max, 2 minutes rest, back squat, 5 reps or 3 reps with 80%, rest 4 minutes, do it over again. That would be a cool complex. You can even use a complex of more speed exercise. So you could do a vertical jump, 2 minutes rest, loaded jump squats, 2 minute rest, squat, for example. So these are things that you can do from a strength and power component. We're going to get to that into more details when we talk about specifically about that component. Component number 3 will be your assistance work. Now, the assistance work is the same assistance work you normally do if you were not using a circuit. So, for example, if you're using a lift-specific approach, and the lift of the day is the bench press, maybe your assistance work included one pectoral exercise, one deltoid exercise, one triceps, and one upper back movement, for example. So the only thing you do is that instead of doing them by themselves, you do them as a circuit. And you take the shortest rest possible between each exercise, and you have a 2 minutes break or rest period after you've completed one circuit. Let's say you have 4 exercises, so you do each exercise, then you rest 2 minutes. But that rest period is active, either doing like walking on a treadmill, could be going light on a bike, could be doing mobility work. What you want is basically prevent your heart rate from coming down at the end of the circuit. So a circuit of 3 to 5 exercises should increase your heart rate in the 75 to 90% of your maximum zone, depending on which exercise you select. And you ideally want to keep it there or as close to it as possible during your rest period, so you spend a decent amount of time with that high heart rate to get that cardiovascular training effect, which would be the same as interval training. And now the exercises you would use for assistance work, as we will see, will depend on the type of schedule or split you are using. Now, the rest period, as I mentioned, is short between exercises. One good way of doing it is that you can actually start with roughly 45 seconds between exercises, and every week you decrease the rest intervals. So in fact, you don't even have to add weight. I mean, guys like you and me want to add more weight to the bar, so that's not ideal for us. But you will have clients who might be intimidated by adding more weight. They're not driven by lifting more weight, or they are insecure, they are anxious, whatever. So for them, a good way to progress without having the burden of adding weight too often would be to gradually take less stress between sets while maintaining the weights they're using. So that will actually make them work harder, even though they don't have to use more weight. Pretty cool progressive method with the Eternal Warrior system. Component number 4 will be your conditioning work. Okay, the conditioning work, it can be pure regular cardiovascular work, but I tend to prefer circuits, loaded carries, or machines that do provide some resistance. I will cover that more, the reasons why, in a few moments. Now, loaded stretching, just a bit more about it. I normally recommend using 1 or 2 loaded stretch movement. It depends on your training split. So for example, if you're using a whole body approach, then you would use 1 lower, 1 upper. So for example, a split squat loaded stretch and a dumbbell press loaded stretch, for example. If you're using an upper-lower split, then you would use only 1 loaded stretch exercise. And if you're using a lift-specific approach, you would also use 1 loaded stretch exercise, ideally targeting the joint that will be involved, the main joint involved in the first lift of the day, ideally to improve your technique parameters on that first movement. Now, when you do loaded stretching, the goal is typically, what I recommend is shooting for 3 minutes of work. That doesn't mean one set, although you can try to gradually work up to holding a loaded stretch for 3 minutes, which is not fun. Okay, but it is doable and it has many benefits. The goal is really to reach that 3 minutes period. What I personally like to do is you have a timer. So you start the timer when you start your stretch. If at any point in the set you feel like you can't maintain proper position, it hurts too much or whatever, you stop the timer, get out of position, take a few deep breaths, reset, start the timer, and continue. You do that until you have completed your 3 minutes of work. In my opinion, that's the best way to do loaded stretching. You don't need specific set and reps recommendations. Now, of course, the amount of weight you're using on your loaded stretch, which can either be your body weight or added load, will impact or bias the main adaptations you're getting. Now, every loaded stretching applications will increase mobility, increase dynamic mobility, thicken the tendons, and build muscle, okay? But you can actually bias toward a bit more. So for example, if you pick a heavier weight, a weight that you can hold only for like 60, 90 seconds initially. So when you start your set, the first bout, you can only hold for 60, 90 seconds, or maybe even less. That will bias the results more toward hypertrophy, okay? You still get the other effect, but it biases it toward hypertrophy. If you pick a weight that you can hold for 90 seconds, up to 2 minutes in the first bout, then you are biasing the result toward thickening the tendons. And if you can actually hold the whole 2 minutes up to the full 3 minutes in one shot, then you're working more mobility, you're working more on dynamic mobility, injury prevention, and also anaerobic capacity, okay? So that's how you use the loaded stretching, which if you want more information, you go on tibarmy.com, and I have a full article on loaded stretching, all the various parameters. I even have a presentation that I gave at the Swiss Symposium, an 1.5-hour presentation on loaded stretching. And if you go on YouTube, you can just type Tib Army loaded stretching. I have like a 4 video series on loaded stretching. I recommend that you look at it. Now, sadly, the videos don't work with Webinar Jam, so you'll have to take my word for it. And even though the weights are like 230 kilos, they're still moving up really fast. The reason I was using those videos, which you would have seen had I been in the UK with you guys, is that when you are using the Eternal Warrior system, or if you are older, you can still do strength work. You should still do strength work. But in my opinion, you should not grind the weight up. You should always try to dominate every single rep. So that actually you try to confer an accelerative component to your load. You should master every rep. So when you do your strength lift, it means you probably always have 2, maybe even 3 reps in the tank. Still going heavy, but you're trying to kick the bar's ass. Now you're going to tell me, well, you just mentioned earlier that you need to train hard. How am I training hard if I keep 2 reps in the tank? Well, you train hard by first compensating the lack of load by an increase in acceleration. So, for example, if I'm using let's say that my max squat would be 240 kilos, I'm using 230. Well, if I'm moving it with as much as acceleration as possible, it's still a maximum effort. And from the nervous system perspective, it's probably even better than grinding the weight up. Second is you're still trying to add weight over time, as we will see in a moment. It's just a matter of you don't have to add weight every session because you want to dominate the weight every session. What I find is that when you are using this approach of trying to dominate the rep, you should stick with the same weight for 2 to 3 workouts. So like probably 2 or 3 weeks. After that, you add a little bit of weight. The goal is not so much to add more weight. You want to dominate a gradually heavier load. And the fact of the matter is you can gain, depending on your level, okay, a high-level athlete will gain only 0.25 to 0.5% per workout on the lift, if all goes well. An average person will gain around 1 to 1.5% per week on the lift, okay? So if if you don't care about dominating the reps, if you are allowing yourself to grind once in a while, it means that even, for example, let's say I had 5% per week, even if I'm only getting 1.5% stronger for a few weeks, it's still work, because I'm going to go from dominating the rep to grinding the rep up to compensate for the fact that I'm not gaining strength as fast as I'm adding weight to the bar. But when my goal is to dominate the rep, you want to add weight only when you can maintain that acceleration or that domination of the bar. So if you gain 1 to 1.5% strength per week, in 3 weeks, you've gained like 4%. So you can add weight at that point. If you try every week to add weight, unless you're adding like 0.5 kilo at a time, you will exceed your rate of strength gain, and eventually you will dominate the weight less and less and less and less until you are full out grinding the weight up. That's not what we want with the Eternal Warrior system. Now, there are 5 options that I like for the strength and power work. My favorite one, the simplest one, is the ramping. What I like with ramping is that it can actually train strength and power at the same time. Ramping means that you start with a moderate weight, something like 50% of your maximum, and you gradually add weight from set to set. The particularity is that you only do, except for the very first warm-up with the empty bar, you only do the number of reps that are planned for that RM of the day. So for example, if I'm ramping up to a solid 3-rep set, a heavy but still not grinded 3-rep set, I'm only going to do 3 reps per set. So I, even like the first few sets might be like 50%, 60%, 70%, 80% with 3 reps. That's still fairly easy. You compensate by accelerating the weight as much as possible during the concentric, which will train power. So you get both the both training effect by gradually ramping up. Okay, so you select 3 to 5 reps. So that's still strength work. It's not the 1-2 rep that we like when we want to max out. But understand that the goal of strength work in the Eternal Warrior system is to maintain or improve neuromuscular function, not to be the biggest bench bro in the gym. Okay, so that's the first option. Second option, strength skill. Strength skill, a bit more higher volume approach. Again, it's a matter of like, what is your personal preference or what is your client's preference? What motivates him the most? You do 4 to 6 sets of around 3 reps with 80-85% of your max, which is submaximal, because with 85%, you can probably get 5-6 reps in. With 80%, you can get 7 or 8 reps in. So 3 reps is very submaximal. But again, you're trying to accelerate as much as possible during the concentric. So you do get some strength speed work in there, okay? And it's still a maximum effort. As I mentioned earlier, you only add weight every 3rd or 4th session to get the same rate of strength of adding weight as you weight increase as you get strength gains. Option number 3 would be heavy partials. Heavy partial would basically be the same as ramping. The only difference is you do it over a partial range of motion. Instead of doing a full range bench press, you start from pin at the mid range, for example, and you gradually work up to the heaviest triple or sets of 4 or 5 as you can without grinding the weight up. Why I like this is that, first, because you don't get into those deeply stretched positions, the risk of injury is lower, which is interesting for people who are older. It's less joint stress, even though the weight will be heavier. And because the weight is heavy, the training effect on the nervous system is superior. Now, the downside of partial range of motion is that not everybody can transfer strength gains from a partial movement over the full range movement. Just because your top half bench press goes up doesn't mean that the full range bench press will go up, which sucks if your goal is to bench press a lot of weight. But if your goal is simply to maintain neuromuscular capacity, then more weight without grinding will actually have a stronger effect on the nervous system and can be very beneficial. Number 4, strength and power complexes. I mentioned those earlier. You're combining 1 power and 1 strength exercise with rest between both. That's pretty cool. And then you have strength speed work, which is option number 5. This would be your typical West Side Barbell dynamic effort day, like multiple sets of 2 to 3 reps with a light weight, but moved fast as hell. Okay. Once again, training more the power, the strength speed curve, which is something that can be done once in a while. So the circuits, which would be your component number 3. Again, you simply pick the same exercises you would normally do in a workout, but you do them as a circuit. The main reason to do that is to get a slight but still significant effect on the cardiovascular system, as well as several health markers like blood pressure, like lipid profile, like blood viscosity, which has been shown to improve through circuit training. There are even some studies showing that it does improve VO2 max, which would mean the heart and cardiovascular system can deliver more oxygen to the muscles. And that is actually a very important component for anti-aging. There's a theory that the better you can transport oxygen and produce energy, the slower the aging process will be. Now, the assistance circuit will depend, or the exercises you pick will depend on the type of training split you're using. If you're using a whole body workout, then your circuit, you will want to include one exercise for each region of the body. So for example, one upper body push, one lower body posterior chain, one upper body pull, one lower body quad dominant, and maybe one show muscle, one bicep or trap or whatever. You notice the order, right? I go from upper to lower, upper to lower. That is to create the greatest possible challenge on the heart or cardiovascular system. It's called the peripheral heart action training. Peripheral heart action, it's based on the principle that the body will always send more blood where it's needed. So when you're training the lower body, you will send more blood toward the lower body. When you're training the upper body, you send more blood to the upper body. When you have to rapidly switch from one to the other, the heart and vascular system are challenged quite a bit more. So it has a stronger effect on the cardiovascular system. Now, if you're using an upper or lower split, upper and lower split, then you will use exercises for each region of that body. For upper body, pectoral movement, upper back, deltoid, biceps, triceps, lower body, quad, glute, hamstring, calves, for example. And if you're using a lift-specific approach, you're using 3 movements to fix the important muscle in your lift, and you add 1 back movement. With lift-specific workouts, I always have 1 back exercise in each workout. Now, this is done for sets of 6 to 12 reps, short rest periods, and gradually working towards shortening those up, 3 to 4 sets. And the rest between sets is active, ideally low-intensity cardio, with the goal of keeping your heart rate elevated. Now, the conditioning, in this table, I have the 5 main type of conditioning. You don't necessarily have to train them all, okay? Because you do have a limited amount of time to train. What I like personally to do is the endurance work, which is either the more traditional cardio or the long, slightly loaded carries, like walking with a backpack, working with a weight vest for 30, 40 minutes. I like to do those on off days because they're non-traumatic on the body. So I would focus more on the other zones, which are what I would consider hard conditioning. Okay, anaerobic power, you probably don't need to use conditioning work specifically for that. Well, you can. Well, let me backtrack. It's more the anaerobic capacity. You don't necessarily have to do that. Anaerobic power, it's very short, all-out efforts. It's between, let's say, 15 and 40 seconds all out. Okay, but you have almost full rest in periods between the set. So it's not like I'm doing 20 seconds really hard, 40 seconds just slow. It's 20 seconds out, full rest, 90 seconds. The goal is to have the best performance possible at each interval. So for example, 10 sets of 15 seconds on the air bike with 90 seconds of rest, or the Sprint 8 protocol, which is sprinting as hard as you can for 30 seconds with 60 to 90 seconds in between reps for 8 sets. Now, anaerobic capacity, you might not need to do that directly in your conditioning section because your circuit training will do that. But in my opinion, it's probably the most important conditioning type to do. So I would personally recommend still using it in your conditioning portion, even though the circuit training will train that. Okay. So what I like to do is, what you need to do is 1 to 3 minutes hard. Basically the hardest you can sustain for that duration, okay? It's really important to understand that the duration is not the most important, it's the intensity. If you do 3 minutes and you can still like talk immediately after your set, you didn't go hard enough. If you can't make it to 1 minute, you went too hard. So the 1 to 3 minute is really a way of assessing, is my intensity level proper? Okay. Now, what I personally like to do is a circuit of 3 metabolic conditioning exercises. For example, kibi swings, rowing ergometer, or prowler pushing, or assault bike. Why? Because it's mentally easier and it's not inferior from a conditioning perspective to do shorter bouts of 3 different exercises than a one longer bout of one exercise. So I would do a circuit with 0 rest this time of 3 of these exercises done for 30 to 60 seconds as hard as possible each. Okay, and there's very limited rest intervals between those exercises. And once you've done one circuit, then you have your rest. So 2-3 minutes of rest, again, to be able to perform optimally. You can also use more traditional intervals, and I personally like to use loaded carries intervals using a 1-to-1 ratio. 1-to-1 ratio means that, okay, you need each set to be between 1 and 3 minutes. So if I'm carrying my farmer's walk for 1 minute, then I will have 1 minute of rest. If I carry them for 2 minutes, I'm going to have 2 minutes of rest, and you understand it, right? 3 minutes off. Not everybody will be able to do that and sustain their performance right off the bat, but it's what you are working toward achieving, okay? Max VO2 work would be accumulating 3 to 8 minutes in a zone where your heart rate is around 90 to 100%, so still pretty hard. What I like is to do that is traditional intervals, like those like 30 seconds hard, 30 seconds relax, for something like 8-ish minute. 8 minutes, like, or 6 to 8 minutes like that will give you roughly 3 to 6 minutes in the proper training zone. Okay, so that's probably the best way, the easiest way to train your VO2 max. Anaerobic threshold is a bit more complex, but it's a pretty cool method if you are, for example, CrossFit athlete or someone who does mixed martial arts or stuff like that. Basically, it will build up your capacity to eventually delay lactic acid and to tolerate it better. Okay, so what you do is you pick one fairly intense exercise, or an exercise you can go hard, like kibi swing, assault bike, rowing ergometer. I like movement that involve the whole body, and you go hard, like fairly hard, not all out, fairly hard, until you start to feel a little bit of burn, like some lactate accumulates in your muscle. When that happens, you either like scale down to a very low intensity of the same movement, or you just stop the movement and you just go walk around for a few seconds until the lactate clears out, it stops burning. Then you start again. You start again until it starts to burn. When it starts to burn, you either scale down or you walk around, and you keep doing that for 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, and basically you want to spend the longest time possible in that zone where you feel a little burn. Okay, you will actually continue your intense exercise when you feel sunburn. You stop when it starts to accumulate, to build up. And gradually what you'll find is that you'll be able to go longer and longer and longer at a hard intensity before lactate can start to accumulate. Now, obviously, you can't talk about cardio without having someone ask you, won't I lose muscle if I do circuit and conditioning work? I like this sentence. That was the first time I read it was by Luke Leaman. Being afraid that a conservative amount of cardio will eat away your gains is the male equivalent of a woman thinking that she will wake up too bulky the moment she starts lifting weight. Meaning that, okay, if you do like a moderate, like I just mentioned, amount of conditioning work, it will have zero impact on your capacity to build muscle. And anyway, if it does, you'll be able to stop way before it has a negative impact. Now, you will always say, yeah, but aren't endurance athletes skinny? Sure, but consider several things. First, the amount, the volume of endurance work they're doing far exceeds the small amount I'm recommending here. What I'm recommending here is roughly, when we go hard conditioning, between 6 and 12 minutes of work, maybe twice a week, and longer duration, maybe 45 minutes once a week. That's nothing compared to the hundreds of kilometers being done by endurance athlete on a weekly basis. It's not even the same ballpark. You can't even compare both. Possible. Second, when you look at elite endurance athlete, they tend to have the ACTN3 XX genotype, meaning that they are not built genetically to be muscular. They have a lower ratio of fast twitch fiber, very high slow twitch ratio. They have low mTOR activation in response to training. They have slow muscle repair, low force production capacity, but they have a naturally higher VO2 max capacity. So they are not built to build muscle. So even if they were training specifically to build muscle, they would still probably be like not huge and muscular. Also, the volume of endurance work makes it hard to be in a caloric surplus. I mean, we all know like the extreme example of Michael Phelps eating 10 to 15,000 calories a day. He had to eat McDonald's just to be able to reach those calories. Now, you look at long distance cyclists, they're kind of the same boat. They probably don't eat 10,000 K, but they are in the 5,000, 6,000 category. And that's just to maintain their weight. And oftentimes, even with that amount of caloric intake, they still lose a significant amount of weight during big races. So that would actually make it very hard to build muscle, even if they were training for it. But the reality is that most endurance athletes do not train specifically to build muscle. They either don't do it at all, they do blocks of strength training in their year. So, for example, a friend of mine is a international level triathlon coach, and he himself at the senior level or master's level is like world champion. What he told me is that the athletes he trains, they will do 3 months block of strength training once or twice a year. So, and for the rest of the year, they don't lift weights at all. Or you can have some who will lift weights year round, but it's a very small amount. And normally they actually don't put that much effort into it. I mean, you've probably seen some marathon runners. It's not like the paragon of training intensity in the weight room. There will always be exceptions, but that's not what we normally see. So the reason why they don't carry what we would say is a lot of muscle, even though they probably have more muscle than their sedentary counterparts, is because, well, they don't train. They don't do anything to build muscle. They have a hard time eating enough to maintain their weight, and genetically speaking, they're not built to be muscular. So what their physique look like has nothing to do with the effect you'll get from doing conditioning work in your training. Best example, look at mixed martial arts fighter, look at CrossFit athletes, look at rugby player, look at American football player. They do plenty of conditioning work and they are all big motherfuckers, right? Okay, what about the interference effect? Interference means that when you're doing two types of training in a similar training window, like very close to each, either on the same day or maybe on subsequent day, but normally on the same day, you will have some interference, especially if the demands or the adaptation required from both are opposites. So, for example, if I'm doing endurance and strength work, well, the endurance work will interfere with strength gain and maybe vice versa. It doesn't mean you don't gain strength. It means you will gain a bit less strength than if you didn't have the endurance stimulus. But again, and as I will point out later, that's probably true mostly from long distance, low intensity cardio, not so much with the type of conditioning I'm recommending, which is loaded and intense. Now, the main causes, you need to understand why that is, the main causes of interference are the AMPK versus mTOR action, as well as muscle fiber conversion. Now, AMPK and mTOR are two enzymes that basically are the opposite. AMPK is more responsible for breaking down stuff, mobilizing energy, reducing inflammation. mTOR will be more about increasing cellular development. mTOR tends to be released more when you are in a caloric surplus. It also is released more in response to strength training or hypertrophy training. AMPK is released more when you are in a caloric deficit, when you need to mobilize stored energy, and when you are doing long duration activities that require a large amount of energy to be mobilized. Okay, when you do a marathon, for example, you will need a boatload of energy to be mobilized because, well, you need to go into your reserves because you don't have that all available in your bloodstream, right? The more you mobilize, the more you need AMPK. So AMPK, where it can cause an interference, is that it can actually inhibit mTOR. If you have a very high level of AMPK, it will inhibit mTOR, which will reduce protein synthesis in response to your training, which can decrease the amount of muscle growth you get. Now, that would be applicable if you were doing like a true endurance session after your lifting workout. But it's not the same thing when we're talking about doing anaerobic capacity work lasting 6 minutes all out, or even 12 minutes. I mean, that's not what it's about. It's not the same type of endurance. That will not create a huge spike in the AMPK. On top of that, because we're using resistance, the resistance itself could actually release some mTOR, less than an AMPK, but still enough to kind of counterbalance it. So it will not lead to a big decrease or any decrease at all, as you will get from the workout. Now, a lot of people go with feeling. What I mean is that when I'm doing conditioning work after my lifting workout, there's a good chance I don't feel the same pump. Like I'm doing my lifting workout, my main lift, my assistance work, I feel jacked. Then I do my cardio work, my conditioning work, my energy systems work, and I feel flat afterwards. So it's very easy in your mind to think I'm losing muscle. All you're doing is just you're increasing blood flow, you're getting the metabolites out of the muscle, maybe even reducing inflammation, I don't know, but it feels less full. It doesn't mean that you are not stimulating the growth. Anyway, you're not bigger after the workout, you're smaller anyway. So it's after, when you repair the muscle, that you get better, right? Now, so the point is that loaded energy systems work, intense energy system work for shorter duration will not have the same impact on the interference effect. Okay. The second thing that can happen with the interference effect is you can have a muscle conversion going on. Muscle conversion actually happens quite easily and rapidly. The initial studies we had didn't show much transference between or conversion between slow twitch and fast twitch fibers because the measurement techniques were not like up to par. But more recent studies show that even in as little as 3 weeks, you can actually have some fiber conversion going on. And the fibers conversion will always be toward the type of work you are asking your body to do. That's why if you want to maximize, and that's something I will cover in the live seminar, if you wanted to maximize fast twitch fiber ratio, increase your fast twitch fibers, you would want to avoid all methods that could potentially shift even slightly toward a slower profile. But that's not what we're talking about here. I mean, if your goal or your client's goal is just to be healthier, look better, feel better, be more functional overall, and get a little bit of everything, well, you don't have to worry about like breaking the 100-meter sprint record, right? You don't need to be a fast twitch machine. There's not a problem if there's a very small conversion, as long as it does not impact muscle growth, okay? And what happens is, yes, the pure endurance work, like very long duration, will convert the fast twitch fibers gradually toward the slower twitch fibers. First, by converting, you will have like hybrid fibers convert to the pure slow twitch. Then you're going to have the pure fast twitch converting to hybrids and eventually to the slow twitch fibers. So we don't want that. But with hard conditioning, that's why I favor hard conditioning, going fast, going hard. Well, you know what? You are still in the fast twitch profile. Maybe not in a super fast twitch, the type 2X, but still in the 2A profile. So you might have some conversion from the very, very fast profile to the fast profile, but you won't have a conversion from fast to slow. That won't happen. And it doesn't matter if you have more 2A or 2X fibers, the muscle growth potential will be pretty much the same. So in that regard, the type of conditioning I'm considering should not negatively impact muscle growth at all. Now, you need to remember, the Eternal Warrior approach is not meant to be the best at anything. It's not the best to maximize muscle. It's not the best to become as explosive or fast as possible or to become super strong. What it is designed for is get decent improvement in everything, be time efficient. For example, with people who have full-time job, family, lots of stress, they probably can afford 3 workouts a week for 45, 60 minutes, but you still need all that umbrella of physical capacity to be developed. So the only way to get that is really to use a jack of all trades, master of none approach, right? Now, and also the goal being to be healthier and improve health markers. So, and with everything with training, there's no approach that is best for everything. It's about understanding what your client needs and using the best tool, the best approach for that person. One mistake that, it's not a mistake, okay? You need to understand something. Giving your clients what you like to do works only if your clients are the same as you and have the same goal as you. For example, if I like to train for strength and power, and all my clients, the only clients I'm taking are strength speed athletes, then by all means, give them the same training approach as I like. And that's why strength coaching is actually fairly easy. Because strength coaching, you need to master one type of training. Sure, there are many components in that system, but it's still only one type of training. With personal coaching, personal training, that's actually harder, contrary to what most people believe, and I've done both, because you need yourself to be a jack of all trades. Because if all you know is high performance training, well, that might not be applicable to 80% of the clients. You can still make it work, but that's probably not what is ideal for them. So a personal trainer actually needs to build a large toolbox of training approaches and be able to assess the client and select the approach that will work best. And that's why, for example, that's why I built this seminar the way it was designed. And you will see that in the live presentation. What I do is that, you know what I've done here for the Eternal Warrior system, I do the same thing with 4 other systems. So I will have the OCTS system, which is more of a strength and performance system. I will have my approach I use for hypertrophy performance. Then you're going to have more of a circuit training approach, and then I'm going to go for the fast twitch conversion approach. For example, I'm still debating which will be the 4th one now that I've covered the Eternal Warrior, because my goal is I'm going to teach you what each system does without getting as scientific as I normally get, but teach you how to apply each of these systems so you will know which one to use depending on the client you have. Well, once again, thank you for putting up with all the thing that's been going on. Honestly, and I might have been able to be there because, as I mentioned, the Omicron variant is much milder than once was believed. The problem is that the US decided to have severe travel restrictions. For example, you need to have a negative COVID test the day before the flight. And for me, it was impossible because, well, my flight was on Monday. It was impossible to do the test on Sunday because I was presenting, and every clinic I checked was closed anyway. You could argue, well, you could have delayed your flight Sure, but my wife is alone with 2 kids, and I want to get her on my side as much as possible. So when I leave, it's already 5 days alone with the kids. I don't want to make that 5, 6, or 7. So that's a decision I made. Thank you for putting up with it. You've been great sports, but you'll still enjoy the great technical coaching of Tom and Naomi, and we will see each other in a few months. So thank you, and have a good seminar.